So today I'm going to talk a bit about food choice and health and some of the influences that we have in our lives that make us make the decisions that we make every day. But first, why am I here, an American in Amsterdam, talking with you today at Food Standards Scotland Conference? Well, my company, Eat Well Global, is a really specialized agency. We are a communications group, but we only work in this very specific area of food, nutrition, and health. And we do this with three main approaches, just to give you a sense of where I'm coming from and what I do on a daily basis. First, I'll tell you who we work for. Our clients tend to be the food industry, so manufacturers, retailers, trade associations, all kinds of different groups that are selling, producing, marketing food. They also tend to be NGOs. We work sometimes with kind of multi-stakeholder collaboration organizations who are doing different things, bringing industry together with public sector, so it varies. But what we do is we offer them insights. We don't offer them these quantitative insights like we heard this morning, but more qualitative, very specialized insights. We do a lot of stakeholder interviews. We try to get deep into the nitty-gritty of some of the questions our clients are trying to answer so they can move forward in whatever direction they're trying to go. And then we help them kind of chart that course, what's coming next. We do a lot of strategic planning around nutrition and health and where might a company want to go if they want to be a thought leader in their sector. And the third bucket, which is probably our largest bucket, is what we call multi-platform stakeholder engagement. And that is a variety of things, but it's basically helping our clients reach their stakeholders. And that could be content development. We write a lot, we write websites, we write newsletters, we create opportunities for them to get in front of their stakeholders, to have meetings, to have events, we create webinars, all kinds of things. So that's just a bit of a basic background of what we do. We also are part of a larger collective of like-minded agencies around the world called the Global Alliance for Health and Nutrition Communications. We're the founding partner, one of the two partners, the other one is a company in Brazil. And we're a certified women-owned business, which we're very proud of as well. So what we're going to cover today, first we'll talk about food choice specifically and why it's important in the context of health and nutrition. We'll go deeper into some of those determinants of food choice and why people make the choices that they do. We'll talk specifically about attitudes, beliefs, and information, three of those determinants. We'll talk about health influencers and those loud voices that your constituents are hearing that are causing them to adopt a certain diet or kind of a new lifestyle or select different types of foods in their daily life. And finally, we'll talk about what we can do about all this information. So first, food choice. Why is this so important? Well, think about what you first did when you woke up this morning. Did you have a glass of water when you got out of bed? Did you make a cup of coffee or tea? Did you put some sugar in that coffee, a little bit of milk maybe, maybe not? Did you have breakfast? Did you have time? Were you running late to catch a train to get to work? Did you have to stop by Greg's and pick up your porridge on the way? Were you cooking a big breakfast for your family? So many different things, so many different decisions that we're making throughout our day, some of them big, some of them small, all of them collectively affect our diet. So, and I should also add that those choices really are different with different populations, and they're substantially different throughout the life cycle. And families and household members also make a big impact on those choices. So into determinants of food choice. So of course that key driver is hunger, but what we choose to eat is not only determined by our physiological needs. So UFIC, which is the European Food Information Council, has put together this determinants of food choice position, and it's quite old now. It's been published, I think close to 10 years already, but the main principles remain the same, and of course they manifest differently in today's society with the influencers that we have, but these major baseline determinants are roughly the same. So the first one is biological, of course. So are we hungry? Will we snack on something when we're hungry? What is our appetite? What are our taste preferences? Those very basic determinants. The next one is economic, and we talked a lot about this today, and this really varies across the globe and across any community. We talked a lot about availability, cost of food, income brackets, what that has to do, or how that influences what food choices people make. This morning in the hotel room, I was listening to the news on the radio, and there was a story about a community in inner city Baltimore in the United States, and they recently opened a non-profit supermarket, and it was opened by the Salvation Army, which is also serving this population of economically disadvantaged people. And they were talking about how this is really, it's not solving all the problems, but it is filling a gap in some parts of that city that are particularly vulnerable and also lacking some access, in addition to the income issues. So there's a lot of interesting different models out there that are addressing this kind of determinant. The next one is a physical determinant. So access and education and skills. So cooking skills, of course, have kind of decreased over the years, and there's a lot of theories and reasons for that. And the interesting paradox, of course, between the decreased cooking skills and the increased interest in food, and food television shows and food bloggers and cookbooks. So cooking is quite trendy and popular, while actual cooking skills are on the decline. So that really also plays a big determinant in what people cook. And also, even people who do cook their own meals or cook for their family, they are using a lot more convenience products these days, and that really, even if they're in the kitchen cooking, they're making different selections than they used to. Social determinants, so culture, family, your peers, meal patterns. Do you eat differently when you're out with your friends versus when you're with your family? Do you eat differently on the weekends than during a busy weekday? I know I drink coffee and tea, but I was mostly a coffee drinker before I met my husband, and he got me into the habit of drinking Earl Grey tea with milk and sugar in the morning. And, at first I thought, this is kind of strange, but when someone presents me with a nice warm cup of tea in the morning, I'm going to drink it and enjoy it. And now it's so integrated as part of my daily routine. When I don't have it, I really miss it. So all these little habits that we don't really think about really do make a difference in the long term in our food choice and ultimately our diets. Psychological determinants, so mood, stress, guilt. So how many of us, when we're stressed, we either eat a lot or eat the wrong things or indulge in certain products or certain types of foods that we may not want to be doing, and then we feel guilty about it, and then we do it some more, and it's a kind of a vicious cycle. Or other times, if we're experiencing some high level of stress, or we're grieving, or there's something else going on, we may lose our appetites altogether, and that really affects our food intake, of course. And then finally, attitudes, beliefs, and knowledge about food, and these are largely shaped by the society we live in. And we'll talk mostly about this in the following part of my presentation. So it's obvious that there's a lot of complexity around food choice. This list is certainly not exhaustive. There's plenty more determinants that we could go on and talk about. But it's important to recognize that these factors really do vary by life stage, they vary by individual, they vary by social class, a lot of things. So attitudes, beliefs, and information, as I said, is what we'll focus on. So moving into that, I want to talk about food tribes. So just like strong supporters of sports teams, or even people who have a very strong membership to a certain church or religion, or even a political party, we all want to be part of something, and whatever that is for you may be different, but the growth of food tribes is a really important thing to just recognize and be aware of. These are really important today to understanding that food revolution and the changing food landscape that we're experiencing these days. A food tribe is defined as a social group linked by a common values and beliefs which shape one's food and lifestyle choices. So in most cases, these tribes, their values and beliefs are very deeply held, and people define themselves as being part of the tribe. It's a defining characteristic. It's personal identity. Some people even equate their beliefs, their food beliefs, with morality. So that we see a lot of these very extreme examples, especially online and social media. There's these clubs, these groups. They're paleo, or they're gluten-free, or a lot of it is free from this, free from that. And it's important to, even if these may be small groups, with trust eroding among consumers, for companies, and even for governments and health authorities, these food tribes become a source of information. So people are looking to them to get information. Whether it's right or wrong, that's a totally different story. But they are going to these groups to get information, and then they grow and they become an even greater influence. So food tribes are kind of an interesting area to watch and just be aware of as you're moving forward with your efforts to improve nutrition. So related to this are food fears. And for some people, they go into the food tribe because they have some kind of a food fear that becomes stronger. Sometimes it's the other way around. The tribe creates the fear if they get quite extreme in their views or beliefs. And of course, there's certainly people who have very legitimate and serious food allergies or sensitivities or issues that their fear is very rational and necessary, and that's not what I'm talking about. And those are not the people that are in this category. For them, it's absolutely critical. But for some, this free from this and free from that, these these trends can go so far that actual eating disorders emerge, called Ortho or Orthorexia nervosa, and this is an obsession with eating foods that one considers healthy, or, on the other hand, systematically avoiding specific foods that they believe to be harmful. And we know that dietary diversity is so important to get all the nutrients we need, but also to maintain a healthy gut microbiota. So these food fears, the food tribes, when it comes to cutting out major parts of the diet, they can be quite detrimental. And of course, this is extreme. And most people identifying as part of a food tribe don't fall into this category. But there could be still some harmful effects of these dietary patterns. And in an age of social media like we are today, these extreme views, and step back and look at the religion or political analogy again, especially political, they catch on. They catch on and they become bigger than they ordinarily would. So even small movements can spark something much bigger and much deeper. So there's a lot of factors that affect food choice, so many things. One might be Instagram, for example, and I don't know how many of you were taking pictures of your lunch today. I was not, but that's because I was balancing my plate. But it's fascinating how many people take pictures of their food, and there's actually research to show that the act of taking pictures before eating can actually make food taste better. It's true. There's quite a few studies on this, especially unhealthy foods like cake versus a healthy food like fruit, for example. There's a study. This one was from Journal of Consumer Marketing, when the act of taking a picture before eating, and that's including like getting the lighting just right and seeking that perfect angle and tweaking it just right, can make food taste better. There's also research that shows when someone is looking on social media and they notice that a lot of people are sharing pictures of healthy foods, they then begin to think that healthy foods will taste better if they then take a picture of the healthy food. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. The the influence that even sharing your food on social media can have in how people perceive foods. It goes beyond just a nice picture. It's actually making a difference. So who are these health influencers, the actual people who are out there making an impact on what people think, who are leading that conversation, right or wrong, in different ways? Before we get into actually who they are, let's talk about why this happened. So consumers now, of course, have instant access to information. Most people are looking online for information on health and nutrition. What you used to need to go to the library for or look to the government for, you can read about it right on your screen, and everyone is an expert. So, of course, some of this information is good and accurate and truthful. A lot of it is misleading, and misinformation is so easily propagated online. So either by an inexperienced reporter who is trying to write a headline for a study and doesn't understand statistics, or didn't get the gist of the study quite right, misinterpreted the study results intentionally or not. Or sometimes it's done to discredit other sources or promote a particular agenda. So there's a lot of reasons why there's misinformation. But the internet is there, and it's the great equalizer, and a very credible, sound, science-based website or content is right alongside websites containing very questionable or sometimes even harmful information or alarming information. So celebrities, of course, get attention for what they're eating or drinking, and whole stories are built up and blown up out of a photo, a single photograph. So what do you do as health authorities when a celebrity or blogger has a bigger audience than a qualified nutritionist? So here's where we're going to talk about specific types of influencers, and we basically break them down into two main categories. The first is the uncredentialed influencers, and these are the folks who have a very, very large following. Many of them are celebrities in their own right, as you can see, Jamie Oliver, Gwyneth Paltrow. Wellness is the new luxury symbol, as we were discussing yesterday evening. It's 15 years ago, I remember saying to a colleague, wouldn't it be great if suddenly it became trendy to eat healthfully? And now we see it is. And of course, that's causing other problems and health disparities. But for a large part of the population, this is a luxury status symbol to be showing and talking about what you're eating. Excuse me. These uncredentialed influencers can also be very mission-driven. Excuse me. For example, the Food Babe is very well known because her mission is to get the chemicals out of food, is what she says. The Nourishing Jessica blog is a woman who had a food allergy. This is her mission now. She's kind of dedicated her life to sharing information and recipes about eating with allergies. The bottom right-hand corner is a woman named Agustina de Andrea from Argentina, and she lost a substantial amount of weight. And now suddenly she's a celebrity because she wrote a book and has a blog and has a website and a whole huge social media following because of her personal experience. So what do all these people have in common? Not just because they're famous, but they lack health and nutrition training. They lack that expertise. Now, it's not necessarily entirely a bad thing, depending on the context. So Jamie Oliver, I think plenty of people could argue that he's done quite a lot in terms of raising awareness for healthy eating and school food, and generally helping people have fun with cooking. But for those of you who do work with brands and you're maybe thinking about working with a celebrity or one of these influencers, be cautious. Be cautious, because it could certainly backfire. So the next group are the credential health influencers. Those are those health experts, the health authorities, they're doctors, dietitians, governments. They focus on the science. They're very credible. Unfortunately, they're not usually very, interesting and sexy in their communication, although there's certainly some exceptions, and I would argue that some exceptions are in this room. But they do play a really important role. I think they play a very important role in influencing other health influencers. So the health authorities, the governments, are influencing the dietitians who are influencing the consumers. And also highly educated consumers who are searching for really credible information that they can trust. So they certainly are important and play a role, and especially when it comes to influencing other influencer groups. So those are the two main groups of influencers, but there is a third. And we call these guys the credentialed celebrities. So they do have professional training. They may be doctors, they may be dietitians, but they've really transformed themselves into true celebrities. So the ones that you see on TV. So in the States, there are all these television shows featuring these physicians, and they talk about usually sensational medical topics, but they have enormous followings. People trust what they say. So they really capitalize on their expertise and their actual training. They are medically trained, they are trained in nutrition, but they've really marketed themselves as celebrities. So they really do get quite a large following. And sometimes they even go beyond health. So these ladies on the right-hand side of the screen, they are two dietitians from Amsterdam. Their company is called The Green Happiness, if anybody's heard of them. And they're dietitians, but they've developed a whole lifestyle plan. So it goes beyond nutrition. It goes into beauty and physical activity and just enjoyment of life. And so they have a very large following. They're very, very popular. They are credentialed dietitians. However, they have, interestingly, rejected much of what the Netherlands Nutrition Center's dietary recommendations really are. So they've really taken their credential, they kind of hold that up as their badge of honor and credibility, but then they really preach a very strict free-from type diet. So it's controversial, and of course this controversy helps them. It makes them more famous, it gets them more followers, it gives them something new to say. So what do we do about it? Well, I'm going to leave you with just 3 examples of what I think we can do to help influence consumer food choice. The first one is just know your audience. And I know it sounds very simple, but when we think about all these different subgroups that we're trying to reach, if we're a government or if we're even a supermarket company, they really are motivated by very, very different things. So it's so important to get to know them, to really understand what motivates them and what drives them. Those determinants of food choice vary so substantially. The messages and the campaigns need to be tailored so specifically if you really want to make a difference and affect their thinking. The second one is to tap into media-savvy dietitians. So this is a shameless plug for the profession because I am a dietitian, but I really see dietitians, especially in certain countries, being an untapped resource. They are trained, they're nutrition experts, but they also really understand how to reach their consumers, how to reach the clients, and they can speak on that level. They can break down the science into a very practical language. They're trained to motivate people. Many of them are very media savvy. They're online, they're on television, they're writing, they have blogs. They're a really, really great resource. So I challenge those of you in the audience who are, say, working for supermarkets to help perhaps facilitate even more of the supermarket dietitians who are trying to either give store tours or have someone in your store who's there to talk to customers kind of when they're at that point of purchase and they're making those food choices then and there. So it's definitely a profession that's growing, but I think there's a lot of room for that and for different organizations to work more closely with dietitians. And finally, get the tone right. So this is where I want to come back to Food Standards Scotland and the great stuff that I've seen so far coming out of this organization. So we know consumers don't want to be finger wagged. They don't want to be told what not to do. They don't want to be told that what they're doing is wrong. Leading with those positive aspects is much more motivating. And humor, and that's where I really want to applaud the Kitchen Crime campaign because the tone is just brilliant. So it's funny and it's relatable, and it's memorable. And that, I think, is exactly the kind of campaign we need, but tailored to your specific audiences. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Erin. That was a great and interesting and I think stimulating way to finish off our formal presentations today. There's certainly a couple of questions that I've got about some of the things that you brought up, and I'm sure there'll be others in the room. I was interested about what you said about food tribes, and how food tribes can develop, become a source of information, and they can grow even stronger. I guess what we know from history is that tribes can also die out. So what's your sense of how quickly those tribes have come and go? Do they move on to something else, or do they become replaced by new ones? How do the tribes interact?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and there's no single answer. So I remember vividly about 10 years ago, someone asking me, he was actually interested in developing a gluten-free bakery, and asked me what I thought about this gluten-free trend that was kind of gaining traction, and I said, it's important for a very small population, and I didn't think it was something that would really catch on. And now it has not gone away. It has grown enormously. And so you never really know. And then other trends in kind of food tribes, as we call them now, they're iterations of something that we saw, say, 3 decades ago, and it's back. So I think they're important to watch and monitor. Yeah. I really caution people, companies, groups, dietitians about the tribes that are so focused on elimination of food categories. Those are so dangerous. I mean, they can be, depending on what they are. So I think, it's tough to say whether they all die out and come back, because each one is very different.
It's fascinating, really interesting way, I think, to think about these things that we see and we read, and as you say, the power of social media for these things to really develop a following. We've got a couple of questions coming through on the screen. Before I go to these, did I see? No, I think that was right. Oh yes, we have one right here at the front.
My question really links to the first one that's on the screen there. It seems to me that the food tribes that you're talking about are very much what I normally call the foodies, and that very middle class trend. So exactly as is written on the screen, how do we filtrate this into people who are not interested in food in the way that foodies are and food tribes are?
Yeah, I think it's certainly not every part of the population we see dividing themselves into these food tribes. You're absolutely right. I think it's important to be aware of them, because it is a decent sized part of the population. I wouldn't call them all foodies. I think some of them are regular people who heard something that, oh, you shouldn't eat that, or you shouldn't go there. And there's certainly a continuum of the ones who are very extreme and more knowledgeable, and those who are just kind of jumping along on the bandwagon. So you're right. It absolutely isn't the entire population. I think it's more just to be aware that a substantial part of the population could be identifying this way, and to think about what that means, and monitor really how big it gets and how much influence they could have on larger groups.
I think that also links to one of the final points you left us with about getting the tone right, and it's about what that different tone is for different demographics. So, the question on the screen about how can these people, how can other people who are credentialed in this area really reach the most deprived societies, or perhaps those demographics that are least receptive to the sorts of messages that we've been talking about. So, the tone has to be, you have to know your audience, I guess, and then the tone has to follow. Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about tone is that as a society, we've gotten a bit less formal in general, and all things, in the way we talk, in the way we communicate, how governments sometimes even communicate. But depending on the sender of the information, I think they're we see some groups doing it better than others, but really, no matter what the audience is that you're trying to reach, whether it's a lower socioeconomic class that's really struggling to make ends meet and select foods that are healthy to feed their family, it's all about meeting where they are and being relatable to them. So I think, and being okay with being a little less formal and just being, you know, just like social media has changed the way we communicate and the way we write and the way we talk to each other. I think that translates over into campaigns and broader communication, no matter the sector that we're coming from.
Yeah, and I think that really resonates with me. I think just thinking about how we work within our organization, we've got formal ways of communicating, and our comms and marketing colleagues are always encouraging us to be thinking about that way. Is it really the right way? Recognizing that the way that the world works now, the way the world communicates with each other has changed, and that it's not about how civil servants write things formally. No. There's lots of other ways to do that. Somebody's asking here, how can we influence the 200, I'd never realized it was 200 daily food decisions, so that those decisions can veer more towards healthier choices?
How can we influence them? Well, I think there's not one way. I think it's about making tiny, tiny changes, just like the example we heard this morning about a very new secret diet of eating less. I think these small, you know, there's not one thing. It's well, maybe you don't take sugar in your coffee, or you just cut down to 1 spoonful instead of 2. And it's the small adaptations or adaptations. And it's not, you know, it's not all at once. And I think that's what trips up a lot of people when they are trying to go on a personal journey, say for weight loss, is they think they have to completely revamp their entire lifestyle. And that's just setting them up for failure. So I think we have to be reasonable and realistic. There's a dietitian in the States, and she's written a bunch of books, and she has a website now, and it's called Better is the New Perfect. And she sees, you know, a lot of people perceive her that she's this dietitian and she's very fit, that she does everything perfectly, and she's like, no way. There's, you know, we all want to eat our chocolate cake sometimes. We live life, and we need to be able to celebrate when it's time to celebrate. We need to be able to, you know, order the pizza on the Friday night and do all these normal things that we do without feeling so guilty about everything. And so her whole aim is just to try to do a little bit better than you did yesterday, or in this one aspect of your life. And I think that approach can really resonate with a lot of people, no matter where you're coming from.
And I guess too, there's something about where those are decisions, those things you described are indeed decisions, but they're also habits. And it's about, I suppose, that continuum between how you recognize that something that is a habit is actually a decision that you could take, and how you can look at it in that context. There's a question here, and it relates to the I think the point you sort of came towards at the end in terms of highlighting our Kitchen Crimes campaign, which was very kind of you. And do you have any case studies or examples of marketing or comms campaigns which have had a positive influence on food choices? Do you know of any examples?
This one that popped into my mind, and it's just because I was talking about it last night. I wouldn't say it's food choice specifically, but it's about hydration, actually. So one of our clients, we work with the waters division of Danone, and they, of course, have a vested interest in people drinking more water. So what they did back in 2009 is they realized that there was a big gap in the literature. There was a lot of hydration research, but primarily on elite athletes and the military, but not for the general consumer, not for the general population. So they noticed this gap. They supported research in that area, and over time, they still put a lot of effort into supporting research on hydration. But one of the things that they did was develop some self-monitoring tools, and so they developed these urine color charts so people can see, okay, did I drink enough today? And they have them there's one for pregnant and breastfeeding women, and one for, I think, average adults, and one for children. And I was sharing last night that I have 3 small boys, and they love everything that has to do with the toilet. So I printed out the urine color chart and posted it on the wall, and they love to come up to me and tell me where they are in the chart and whether they need some more water. And that's not a food choice example, but I think it's an example that illustrates how self-monitoring tools can be really an interesting way. Although it's interesting too, with my particular family and my particular situation, I have twin boys. One of them is really into this thing. The other one, he's, the first couple of weeks it was there, he thought it was cool, and then, he's not into it anymore. So that just also reinforces the idea that different things will motivate different people. So there's no one size fits all.
Do we have any? Yes, we have a question from Alistair Graham from Kantar.
I've got a question about calories. It's something we've talked a lot about today, and in terms of calorie reduction. And obviously a lot of what's been talked about from the industry is without the consumer needing to know too much about calories. But again, from the information we've got, people can bandy out 2,500 calories, 2,000 calories, and are able to look at a sandwich in a shop and see it has 400, but it seems to fall down from the stats that came out a few weeks ago, that adding it all up seems to fall down a little bit. So I wondered if you've had any examples of anything you've done or anything you've activated or any campaigns that have been useful in helping the public better understand calories as a currency and how it can all come together as a bit of a monitoring tool like you've just been talking about?
Yeah. That's a great question. Other than technology, so apps, food tracking apps and that sort of thing, I can't say that I've come across any specific ones to help people track their calories. So the apps, of course, make it really easy to record what you ate, and it calculates it all, so you can see where you are in different nutrients and calories over the course of, say, a day or a week. But beyond that, I haven't really seen anything. I mean, there may be something I'm not aware of, but I haven't seen any good examples of that kind of easy self-tracker. It's different from your urine color, which is a very kind of immediate, you can't have a physical biometric kind of indicator of how many calories you took in. So the tracker apps, I think, are the best ones that I'm aware of.
There's a question that's come in, which I think links back to what you spoke about at the outset about determinants of choices. So tiredness, stress, and boredom, for example, can lead to comfort eating or treating. Do you have any insights into either the psychology or physiology behind how that influences our choices?
If I did, I'd be making it up. So I'm not a behavioral psychologist, so I don't know. I could, of course, anecdotally or based on my overall knowledge comment, but I think, no, I don't know.
I was very interested in what you said about dietitians being an untapped resource. I'm sure that was music to the ears of Heather and other dietitians in the room. And I think that's a really important point for us, and one that if my colleague Heather Peace was still here, she would, I'm sure, have picked up on, in terms of, you're absolutely right, it's such an important route for us to communicate with the public, to get the credible information about healthy diet across. So I think that's a really good reminder for us about, it's not just about those of us sitting behind desks developing policy, it's actually about then using that professional route actually into the public, into populations. Right. Well, if we don't have any more questions, I'm just going to sum up what I think has been a really interesting and varied session. I think our speakers in this section have been quite different in terms of Daniel talking to us about a lot of what we know in relation to the scene in Scotland and how the Scottish Government policy is developing, and then your much broader insights, Erin, into just the sorts of things that drive people's food choices, making us think about the things that are habits, as you say, the cup of Earl Grey tea, but actually when you boil it down, pardon the pun, I know it's late in the day, but I can still come up with a little pun, actually can be decision points, as you say, one spoonful of sugar or none at all. And I think that really useful insight about thinking about the people that are shaping the public's views about food choices. And I know this is something that we wrestle with. We get frustrated sometimes, I think, in our organisation about the fact that our evidence-based, robust information and advice doesn't chime, it just doesn't filter through a lot of the, as you said, much sexier, perhaps uncredentialed influencers who are out there. So I think that's something that I think we recognise and have to think differently about. So what can we do then for our the way that we want to influence and the things that we would like to be able to reach into the population much more deeply? What other ways are we going to have to do that? So I would just like, Daniel has had to leave us, unfortunately, but I would like to thank both you and Daniel for your talks to our conference today and for the way that you've answered our questions and some of the comments that have come through the discussion. So if I can ask the audience to thank in the usual way, but just before doing so, I think we are gathering in plenary in here shortly for Jeff. Jeff Ogle, Chief Executive, is going to give some final summing up comments. But just before the other group join us, if I could just ask you to thank Erin and Daniel in absentia. Thank you.